This episode of Motive Garage presented by Sparesbox, we put a full exhaust on our new Nissan Z, see if it makes more power on the dyno. We do a couple of small suspension tweaks before we go back to the drag strip to see if it's any quicker. So we had some very impressive power gains just from tuning the new Nissan Z with the ECU Tech software at CRD. We started with 271 kilowatts and ended up with 306 kilowatts. Overall, pretty damn impressive. But the best thing about that tune though was how much it woke the car up on the road. It really did make a difference to how fun the car is on the street. Ignore the drag strip times, just overall drivability and fun factor were massively improved to the point where I have to say, if you've got a new Nissan Z, go and get a tune in it right now. But me and the guys at CRD wanted to see if we could make even more power. Let's go.
Looking under the Z, the first thing you notice is how small the exhaust system is, with the smallest point on each side being 1 3/4 inches. With 2 cats in each downpipe, it certainly looks very restrictive to making power. But is it? With how tight it is in the engine bay, making it difficult and time consuming to develop our own dump pipes, we ordered some AMS downpipes to install. It's not the world's hardest job to install them, but it certainly isn't the easiest. You can see here just how small the piping is as the downpipe goes to the rest of the exhaust system. This could not only restrict flow, but is also one of the reasons the exhaust is so quiet.
The last time we took the Z to the drag strip, it was hard work. Axle tramp, we had diff knock on gear changes. The gear change is pretty difficult to do quick. And the biggest thing was we could not do a burnout due to the electronics in the car, so we couldn't get any heat in the tyres, and we just couldn't get a good enough 60 to get a decent time. 12.5 was the best that we could do. Now, I know some of you out there are going to say, but I saw this guy on YouTube run this time or whatever else, but none of them were at a drag strip with official timing, so we can only go off that. And we think the 12.5 is pretty good considering another tuned manual Z in Australia went to the track on street tyres and it was in the 14s, so they are really hard work. So the next thing we're going to tackle was a couple little suspension tweaks to see if we could improve it.
The first round of suspension changes we decided to make was the installation of some GKTech solid diff bushers and GKTech subframe bushers to help try and stop axle tramp and tighten up the rear end, and some GKTech traction rods. We wanted to fit the lower arms for better camber adjustment, but we need to install coilovers and remove the separate spring before we can do that. All of these parts are the same as the 370Z range. The only part from the GKTech 370Z range we couldn't fit was the diff brace. With the new GKTech parts in, it was on to CRD's new wheel aligner. We wanted to take some negative camber out of the rear and change the alignment to suit drag racing a little more for the time being. We did put the car on the dyno with the downpipes and standard catback exhaust and found the increase in power was minimal, 3 to 5 kilowatts at most. So we then got into fabricating a catback exhaust system for the car. CRD had a stainless rear muffler custom made with a 3.5-inch inlet and twin 2.5-inch outlets. With the muffler organised, it was on to fabricating twin 2.5-inch into a 3.5-inch stainless exhaust system with a resonator. Our aim was to have an exhaust that was quiet at idle and while cruising, but gave the car some bark under full acceleration. The finished result is a work of art, and CRD is working on having these available for sale in the near future. But first up, what does it sound like? Con then set about getting into tuning the Z with the new exhaust system to see how much more power we could make. The ECU Tech software has a lot of parameters to adjust and check over, so it's certainly not done in a couple of runs. But all of this testing will benefit future Nissan Z customers at CRD. We ended up with 320 kilowatts or 430 horsepower at the hubs. This is an increase of 14 kilowatts or 20 horsepower over the stock exhaust with a tune, but a rather impressive 50 kilowatts or 66 horsepower over stock. Most of the extra grunt is in the top end of the rev range. We have intentionally limited the boost and torque in the mid-range to help conserve the stock engine and keep the car drivable. Too much low-down torque and the car simply just spins the tyres. The overall gains from stock are rather impressive, even if the gains over stock exhaust with a tune weren't all that much. The size of the exhaust was obviously pretty well matched to the size of the turbos from factory. We then decided to add some octane booster to see if the car would respond to some more ignition timing, as we may look at switching to race fuel for a little while. The car picked up 5 horsepower, so we will look at trying some race fuel next, as running E85 requires nearly 7,000 Australian dollars worth of fuel system upgrades.
As we mentioned earlier, the big problem we had at the drag strip was trying to do a burnout. Essentially, after you dump the clutch, as soon as you touch the brake and you have your foot on the accelerator at the same time, the ECU cuts power. Now, a lot of people watching that last time said to us, in the 370Z, you have to do X, Y, Z, either remove an ABS fuse or there are other things you can try and do to work around those electronics. However, what we wanted to do was try and do it all properly through the ECU Tech software. Now, the guys at ECU Tech had already sorted out the automatic Z, as you can tell by the guys from AMS going into the 9s, but they hadn't done it with a manual. So they sent the information to CRD to try and sort that problem out. And after it got off the dyno, we mucked around for about an hour at the front of the shop, and we simply just could not get it to work. And that meant that we had to go straight to the drag strip, running late, without the ability to do a burnout once again. Second time at the drags, only a couple of very small changes. The whole point with this car is to go step by step and make very little changes. So we'll see what happens. We do have a little bit more power, but our ability to do burnouts is still not there. So is what it is. Well, first impression is that it is a little bit better. Doesn't axle tramp as much on launch, but obviously without doing a burnout, I just cannot get the tyres warm enough to launch this thing hard. Not like it should to get a decent time that we want to get to with the power that it has. There's still a noise on gear change. It could be the gearbox moving rather than the diff, but the back end does feel a little bit better than before in terms of how much, I guess, thud there is on gear changes or little chirps on gear changes and stuff. So the back end does feel a little bit more composed with the subframe bushes as well as the diff bushes in there, but whether it made a difference at the time, honestly, that first run like that, I can't really tell, but let's find out, shall we? Okay, so first run, a 2.060, so like I thought, not any better. It was a 12.6 at 115, so it's not my PB. I just feel like the car probably did it a little bit easier than last time, but unless we can get this thing to 60, this is where it's going to be, unfortunately. Well, exactly like the first pass, it's not going to hook without a burnout to get some proper temperature in these tyres. The Supra was able to do like a 1.660 and go 11.4 at 119 with these tyres on it. They're a couple of years old, so we're going to get some proper temperature to get them working properly, and it's just not happening. You know, it takes off okay, I guess, but it's not enough to put a decent number under this thing. It's just going to run mid-12s all day. Yeah, the last run was like a high 12.6, that was a 12.70. 2060 again, 115. If anything, I'm consistent, right? All right, third and final pass. The 60 was slower, it was a 2.1. It went 12.7 as I expected for that 60, but it went 116.4 mile an hour. So we now have a couple of mile an hour compared to before, which shows us we have the grunt. So the extra power is there, a couple extra mile an hour. On an equivalent pass like that last time, we were doing like 114, 113. It was a bit cooler last time. So yeah, this time, slightly warmer and going mid 116 mile an hour. So the power's there, we just can't use it. We need to do more work with, Shockworks have built us some coilovers to use for drag racing. We're going to try and see if we can sort out this burnout problem, but we'll try something else now. We tried to do it with software. We might have to do it another dodgy way. We'll see how we go. But yeah, until we can get that 60 down to like 1617, there's not much we can do. So, but yeah, happy with the extra power. Proved it. That's all we can do. So what's the plan from here? Well, Shockworks have developed us some coilovers that will suit drag racing a lot better than the factory stuff. We're going to get those in, plus some more GKTech suspension arms, and we're just going to have to find a way to do a burnout and try and get the launch control to work so we can finally get a decent time in our Nissan Z. There's a lot more other things that are happening with this car in the background that we're testing. We're going to keep that up our sleeve for now, but make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any development. Now, it's all well and good what it did at the drag strip and on the dyno. Let's find out how it drives on the street. All right, let's just get straight to it. What does it sound and go like? Here we go. To me, the sound is kind of halfway between a 370Z and an R35 GTR. It's not as raspy as the naturally aspirated Z, but it hasn't got, I guess, the same sort of bark the R35 does. So what's it like at freeway speeds? Well, we're doing 100 Ks an hour, a little over 2,000 RPM, and there is absolutely no drone whatsoever. So cruising in the car is fantastic. A tiny bit of volume over a factory car, but honestly, you can barely tell it has an aftermarket exhaust while cruising. But what you can hear now though is due to the solid diff bushes and the subframe collars, you can actually hear more road noise and diff whine from the back of the car. Would you put up with it? Depends what type of customer you are. If you care about going fast and you are going to take the thing to the track, you'd put up with it. A normal customer would probably ring in Nissan to say, hey, I've got a noise in the back. I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera here right now, but yes, you can hear some road and diff noise in the back. But with the stereo on, how much can you hear? Not enough to care. So if you're cruising a little bit over 2,000 RPM and you roll into it, it hasn't got any drone or any weird noises, but at about 3,000 RPM is where the raspiness kind of kicks in. I'll show you. Hear what I mean? Between 3,000 and about 4,500 RPM, it starts to sound like a naturally aspirated 370Z. And it's a little bit raspy. Could you get rid of that? Maybe. Maybe it's the downpipes we're using that are helping make that raspy note. but after 4,500, when you go full throttle, it kind of goes away. So it's really sort of that 3,000 to 4,000 RPM range where you get that raspiness that sounds more like a 370Z than an R35. All right, let's get back on a normal road now and see what it's like driving around. So if we're putting, you can see it's pretty good. It's when you get that 3,000 to 4,000 RPM mid-range is where the sound really gets like that. All right, we'll take off from this set of lights a little bit more briskly than just, well, trying to be economical and quiet, and we'll see how raspy it is. There you go. So really, that raspiness is right in the mid-range of the torque, and it's all throttle dependent. So if you're cruising around normally, it's not very raspy, there's no drone, but when you get up it like that, yeah, that V6 sound is there in the mid-range, but then in the top end, the note changes. So I'll show you one more time what I mean about the raspiness between 3 and 4. You can hear the raspiness start at 3,000, but by 4,000 RPM, it's gone. Watch. So there's just 1,000 RPM window where it sounds like a naturally aspirated Z, and after that it sounds, well, probably more like an R35, I guess. So yeah, so quiet below 3,000, raspy from 3 to 4, and then great after that. Oh yeah, the car's actually pretty quick now, isn't it? So in summary, very happy with the exhaust that CID have done on our Nissan Z because it ticks all the boxes, right? It's quiet at idle, it's quiet when you're cruising around slowly so you can stay incognito. It has no drone on freeway speeds when you're cruising, but it has some bark when it matters, and that is when you give it some throttle, and it doesn't sound terrible. There's a little bit of a 3,000 to 4,000 RPM raspiness, but that's just life with a V6. So overall, this exhaust does everything I wanted it to do. It makes more power, it sounds better when you're accelerating, but isn't annoying and loud when you want to drive normally. If anything, the most noise that's been added is more because of the diff and subframe bushes in this car. Do you need them if you're just building a cool street car? No, but you know that we're going to be developing the car on the track, so we did need it for this car. But all in all, quite happy and can't wait to see what we develop next on our Nissan Z. So make sure, once again, subscribe, click the notification bell, and also put in the comments, what else do you want to see us test on the Z? Circuit stuff, brakes, turbos, what do you want to see? You tell us. Will that influence our decision? I don't know. Let's see what happens, shall we?